What does it look like to have courage of voice and to move past fear and do it anyway? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to Women Leaders on the Move, a Her C-Suite radio podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Benamou, and every week I learn right along with you, listening and talking with amazing guests like today's guest. I am also the founder of Her C-Suite, a powerful community where we help women stay relevant, be in demand, and ready for what's next. Today's guest is Dr. DeRetta Rhodes. I can't wait for you to listen in to what she did to overcome any obstacles that she had in her career. She's had an amazing trajectory, and she continues to pay it forward and pay it around her and make an impact. Let's get started with this conversation now. DeRetta, I am so thrilled to welcome you to Women Leaders on the Move. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This is absolutely amazing. I so appreciate you for this.
I appreciate having you, and you have had such an incredible journey. We were just talking a little bit before coming here. Can you give us a snapshot of that journey? Because it's quite amazing.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I don't even think of it that way sometimes. You know how you're just kind of doing things and you're just trying to make things happen in your living? I will tell you a lot of my perspective in my career, it was always around what's the next best opportunity and how can that help me to build, I like to say, my own toolkit. And so every role that I've had the opportunity to be in, it was a result of either a relationship that I had with someone that knew me, that had worked with me. And so that is kind of how my trajectory started and how it kind of went the way that it did. I will tell you, I never thought that I would start in human resources because I actually have an undergraduate degree in hotel restaurant management. I thought I was going to be running hotels and restaurants. Clearly, that is not the path. So I started down that path, went into human resources, and have been in that particular profession for the rest of my career with different opportunities, with doing specific roles when I was in Ernst & Young, when I was an inclusiveness leader, when inclusiveness wasn't even talked about. And then when I've had the opportunity to be at different industries, but still in human resources. So it has been very gratifying, the opportunities that I've had. And it has been based on relationship and me thinking about how do I build my skill every time I go into a new role.
Well, I just have to ask you this question because I'm watching behind you and I see, can we describe for our listeners what I am seeing? Because it's pretty magical. I'm just saying that for our listeners, I get to see an MLB stadium you are the first. I have never had anyone in the major leagues on my show. How fun is that?
It is a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. And I worked for a company in Atlanta. They're going to be like, I have to send them messages like, you're not going to believe who I had on my show because it's so exciting. So a little fangirl moment here, but
that is also good. It is so funny because this is the best time. This is when we are planning for the season. We actually have reported for spring training this week. And so we're back at the ballpark getting ready for opening day. And so a lot of what you're seeing now is the preparation for that. I will tell you a funny story about baseball. So I grew up watching and listening to baseball with my grandparents. And then as we fast forward, my sons played baseball. So I was a baseball mom long before I became somebody working for an MLB baseball team. And so it has really been, again, a very interesting trajectory with that as well. So I knew the play of baseball long before I knew the business of baseball. I can tell you that.
And how much did that help?
That's a great question. I worked at Turner Broadcasting, 2008. I started with Turner Broadcasting. That is the same time that the Atlanta Braves were sold to Liberty Media. The interesting thing about that, though, is that intact leadership team is the same intact team that hired me in 2019. And so I knew of some of those individuals back in 2008 when I was at that time an HR director working for the Atlanta Braves, supporting finance and accounting. And then fast forward, and I end up having the opportunity to come speak to them and talk about the role that I started with the Atlanta Braves, which was the SVP of Human Resources. And so the funny story about that is that I am now going into my 8th season.
Wow. You know, the through line for me is that connection. And we talked a little bit, and your book talks about this, about voice. How did that play a part in those connections and maintaining those relationships? Because clearly that had to have had some impact in the trajectory there.
I had a mentor that said to me very early on in my career that you need to make sure that those individuals that are mentoring you and who you know that are sponsoring you, that you stay in touch with them. I intentionally did that. Like I made sure that those individuals that hired me into positions or those individuals that allowed me to serve on a board or those individuals that I worked with, I stayed in contact with. And as a result of that, when something would come up, they would call my name and they say, "Hey, would you be interested? Would you like to do this? Would you like to be considered?" And so all of the individuals that in my book that did my endorsement, one of them hired me for my first HR job. Another one, I was his HR executive and supported him when he was a leader who is now a CEO of a major organization. And another one was actually my mentor when I sat in my first CHRO role with the YMCA of Metro Atlanta. And he was our chair for the HR committee. And to tell you the mentoring that he did for me and the discussions, and I'll never forget one day, and we have these, it was a really, really bad day. And I said to him, I said, "I am truly battle fatigued." And he looked at me and he said, "It's okay to be battle fatigued, but it is not okay to quit." And so when I think about those type of relationships and how instrumental those individuals have been for me and still, that's the one thing I want to talk to people and make sure you just stay connected. Whatever is going on, figure out a way. And I think it's easier to do it now because texting's easy. It may not be as personal, but it at least gives you those reach outs that you can make sure that you do. And so that has been very instrumental for me, for my relationships, and for people that have just stood up for me. And so for me, equally important is for me to stand up for others because it's happened for me.
That sponsor in the room is so important and advocating for someone behind the scenes. How has that helped the community that you're leading now? Do you encourage that within the culture? How does that work?
Absolutely. And a lot of times, there's always this discussion about the difference between a mentor and the difference between a sponsor, right? For your mentor knows you, you're in a bubble, you can have those type of conversations. And so oftentimes you have those people that are part of your community. I have many of those that if it's been that day or wherever I am, I know who I can call from a mentoring perspective. Sometimes, Nellie, you don't know your sponsors. Sometimes your sponsors end up being individuals that you have impressed, that you have influenced, that you have worked with in different capacities, and they're sitting in a room that you're not sitting in, and they're calling your name. One of the opportunities that I have, and to this day, I know someone sponsored me for it, but I still don't know who it was. When I had the opportunity to do a seconded experience in Hong Kong when I was working with Turner Broadcasting. And during that time, I got a call and they were like, "Would you be willing to do this opportunity? It's going to be in Hong Kong for 3 to 6 months." And you'd go back and forth. And I was like, absolutely. Well, those decisions had been made and somebody had brought my name up. And so that's how, when you're in the right places at the right time and just be who you are so that individuals can feel connected and want to sponsor you.
What I love about that story is as a mother and you have boys, and a lot of times what can happen in those behind the scene conversations is an assumption can be made and saying she's not going to want to do this because it's going to be too hard. So kudos to whoever that was to not even have that enter the conversation and ask. And I think a lot of times we wait to be tapped. In this case, you probably didn't know you were being tapped, but how do you guide women, especially, to know that we shouldn't be waiting for that tapped moment because people don't know what it is that we're looking to do? We're not telling people.
You need to articulate the things that you desire to do. And, if you want an expanded role or if you want to have an opportunity to experience something different, you have to tell people because a lot of times, you're right, assumptions are made. People may not know, and you may be wanting something like that to give you, as I had just mentioned, a different type of skill set. You have to just start articulating and having those conversations. And this is what I always encourage. When you have a leader that you report to, make sure you have consistent, regular one on one meetings, whether you're calling them or they're calling them, and you're able to discuss these very things about what you want, what you desire, what you want to get more skills in. My thing about skills and experience is that once you get them, no one can take them away from you. And so you take those in and you treasure them and you have them as your chest of things that are your repertoire, like I'd like to say. And you're able to come back and say, well, I have had this experience, and I've done XYZ. I am uniquely situated to be able to do what you need me to do. And so when you begin to think about that, I think it makes a difference. And by the way, I also feel like it builds your confidence. It builds your confidence in terms of, you know what? I've had this experience, good or bad. I had it. I now have it as a part of who I am. It's the fabric of who I am. And I can now give this back to someone else. And so I think it just helps you create that tapestry that you want to have.
Hey, it's Natalie, and I wanted to pop in and invite you if you are feeling siloed and alone and aren't sure what to do next. We have a powerful community that supports women just like you. Check it out at hercsuite.com. When you were writing your book and thinking about these topics, what were some of the things that you discovered or uncovered in terms of leadership and people expressing what they're interested in or having that voice? What were some of the things that came through?
I know for me personally, it was fear. I was always very fearful of failing. And I was also very fearful of making a mistake. And so, this construct that you have to be perfect, actually, we need to denounce that at any given time, because what happens is that puts you in this loop with which you are constantly doubting yourself. And so I think when we start thinking about things differently, and I always talk about fear now is a paradigm. So although I may be fearful, that does not mean I won't do it. And then the moment that I begin to do the things I fear the most, the more comfortable I become to do the things that I thought I feared. And so it becomes this way of which you're able to really cycle yourself out of it. It is okay to be scared. I didn't always think that. I really didn't. But it's okay to be scared. It's just not okay not to push through the fear. And so I started with fear. I think the other thing for me was isolation. I felt like I was the only one that was experiencing what I was experiencing. I was the only one that was sitting right here in this bubble, and nobody else was experiencing the very same thing of either isolation or feeling like you were singled out or anything else that dealt with possible microaggressions that you were getting, and then how that kind of set on top of my fear and my doubt. And so I really had to think through those. And I do think both fear and doubt that manifests itself in the imposter syndrome. So it's very easy to get a systemic way of thinking about things that blocks you from what you should be doing. And so I think you have to start just kind of etching out what that fear is and move it past. But that's what I started with. So then when I started talking with people, when I started doing my research and I started having conversations, it was the same. It may have been different experiences that people were having, but they were able to articulate it the same way. It was either fear, it was doubt, it was lack of confidence. It was, if I say something, what's going to happen? And I had a really good colleague of mine that I worked with somewhere, and she said that her mother said, what's the worst they can do to you? They can't eat you. So what you need to do is just push through and make that happen. I wish I could say that that was my own, but I have to give credit where credit is due with that one. And so I think when you start building your experiences, it helps you have the, I like to say, fortification of being able to also build your confidence through everything that you end up doing.
As you are talking and you're talking about fear and doubt, we all have it. I think sometimes you see someone on paper or you see them on, social media and you're like, they look great. They're so confident. Or even if you see them speak. I mean, before I go speak, I stand there and I do the power pose before I go on stage because I want that testosterone boost. I'm doing it now. You can't see, but I'm standing in the power pose because, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm interviewing DeRetta. I've got to have my act together. Like I better not mess anything up. So we all have those moments, right? And you also have had an experience which a lot of our listeners have also had, which is when you're the first and the only, or you walk into a room and it doesn't reflect anything of you or people that you're working with. How do you turn that around with when it comes to fear and all those other things? Because I think people do experience that.
I think that goes back to the conversation that I had about isolation because you end up being the only one feeling that way. My grandmother was very instrumental. She was in a farm community. She was a kindergarten teacher. Everybody knew who she was. She had her degree from University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, and so she was such a graceful woman. And she would say to me, "If you have been chosen to be in that room, that's where you're supposed to be." Now, others in that room may not think that. May be others in that room that are trying to figure out why are you there. But if you were called to be in that room, that's where you're supposed to be. And I think hearing her oftentimes in that situation, I mean, she was just very grounded about that's what it is and that you just move forward and keep doing what you're supposed to do. And I think it helps shift a little bit, but it's still hard. You can appreciate this because I work in the sports industry. And so it is very clear about sports in many of the sports arenas that are out there, not just baseball, but basketball, football, all that good stuff. And I think that there are moments when I'm like, I'm sure someone is saying I'm not supposed to be here, but for some reason, I was asked to be in this room. And because I was asked to be in this room, I need to at least show up so that I know I'm supposed to be in this room. That's a thing that you have to constantly do in your head and constantly speak to, and then have your community and your tribe when you get through with those. So you can go back and kind of retreat and be like, this is what just happened. I just need to talk about it. Having that fortification to go into the room and do it because you're supposed to be there.
And I think about that whether you're going into a boardroom or you're dealing with, some big, let's just say, personalities, very skilled, highly skilled personalities. But on a board level, you go to your first board meeting and you just joined a board, and it can feel very intimidating as well because you're coming into the room and maybe everyone has known each other and you're the first person to come into that room, or if the board isn't balanced and you're the only woman, whatever that might look like, you can have those moments. What are some of the things that you do to prepare for that and to bridge some of the gaps? Because there can be those gaps you were saying, like some people may not think, why, we have a new board member, we don't need that board, whatever it might be, right? So, what do you help people think about when they're in that moment of walking in? Your grandmother's quote, by the way, is gold. I love it. So, so I'm going to keep that. I'm going to write that. I'm writing that one down. I'm going to have it at my desk.
Let me tell you, she has some gems. So, the other thing, and this is probably coming from my parents, because I grew up with educators. And with educators, they are always about preparation. And so I think one of the things that has been very critical for me going into those type of situations, and I also will tell you, because I worked for Ernst& Young at one point in time, dealing with partners, you needed to make sure you were very prepared as well. And so I take a scan and an understanding of everybody in the room. I research each person. I understand where they're coming from, what their views may be. LinkedIn makes it much easier than it did back in the day. So before it was a little bit more difficult, but now getting research, being very astute about the people that you're in the room with. And so you can ask the appropriate questions you want to ask. You can engage in such a way that ends up being meaningful for that individual because you have taken the time to learn about them, to research about them. And a lot of times, believe it or not, people appreciate the fact that you've taken that time. So they may have thought of you of one way, like, why is this person coming into this room? But what you've done is you've been able to create some type of connection that they're able to then kind of take off some of whatever may have been there before, doubt, concern, indifference. You're able to do that when you do your own research. And I think that's so important. People want to be able to be seen. So when you are able to do that, I think that makes a difference in terms of coming into that type of environment. That also helps you to set yourself apart in that environment and engage quicker. Like, that time of engagement, it becomes quicker and you're able to start having really meaningful conversations and be brought into the fold when they know they need to have you there.
Yeah, I think the human connection and that piece at the end of the day, even if you are, in a role where there's big personas, or if you're in a role where maybe it's not in the same scope of what you're facing, but I think being prepared, and now with AI, it makes it so easy. You can, put it in with Perplexity or what have, or, it used to be Perplexity. Now, everybody's caught up, but being able to being able to do some quick research. I do still go to the old school, LinkedIn, but you can do it a lot quicker. So if you're looking at this year and the horizon, and we were saying earlier about before we started about numbers and how numbers haven't really been improving in leadership for women. Some women are disengaging. Thinking about your story, and what can we share with someone listening that's like, I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. When I started her C suite, we were all about women getting to the C suite. And then some of those women didn't want to go to the C suite anymore. They were like, you know what? I don't think that's what I want. So as we think about advice that we can give to our listeners about, how can we reframe things or still feel encouraged to keep going for those dreams, not feel like they're not attainable. What could we tell her that, she's listening?
I think that's a great question. Even when I did my research in my dissertation, 2008, 2009, 2010, and you're right, the numbers have not gone up dramatically. And interestingly enough, we as women are making different decisions and opting out. I will tell you what I always want individuals to think about. People are looking at you. They're looking at you and they're typically aspiring for hope. And I think I try to make myself available, Natalie, to individuals that reach out to me. And I try to encourage as much as I possibly can because all of us are in different journeys and we're navigating different things that are happening in our lives, whether it's young children, whether it's going through a divorce, whether it is aging parents, any of those things. And so I was at dinner with a young woman who thinks she wants to go into human resources. And we were having this conversation, and I was giving her my trajectory, and I was giving her the good, bad, and the ugly, like all the stuff. And I think we need to tell our stories because a lot of times people may see us sitting here and thinking that was easy. Like you make it seem like it's easy. No, 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 none of this. None of this was easy, and it's still not. And I think when we are transparent and we're having the conversations and we're telling people our story, it gives hope that you can do the same thing. It was so funny. I was talking to somebody just the other day about what would you want to leave with somebody? What would you want them to know? And I want them to know that if I've done all of this, so can you. I do not have the corner on the market of anything that I've done. I don't. I had tenacity and I had a village that was behind me and I had bad days and I had days that I failed and I got up the next day and started over. Like it was never none of this for any of us is easy. And I think when people hear that story, it gives you the courage to get back up the next day, knowing that this is not your destination either. You're not going to stay right here. As you continue every single day, it makes a difference. I think we need to be telling stories. I think we need to identify hope and say, we need each other out here. We need your voice. We need you in spaces. We need what you bring because it's valued. We need to make sure that you know that you need to be there because someone behind you is looking at you wanting to be you.
It's so good. And I also think of the quote, behind every woman, successful woman is herself. So we have to remember that we're our first cheerleader, and it can be hard. There are days like you're describing my life. I'm like, yeah, I know. But it's true because I do feel, I always think that my role is to live